Forza Horizon 5 features over 700 cars, and each one of them can be upgraded and tuned in many ways, which makes tuning a complicated aspect. The game itself does not teach you how to tune, and when it does, it often ends up misleading players. Most people end up downloading pre-made tunes from other players, which are often garbage. So here is everything you need to know about tuning in Forza Horizon 5. You might have already seen other tuning videos and maybe tried using tuning calculators. Forget about all of them. If you really want to go fast in Forza Horizon 5, this guide is the real deal. Before we begin, there are a few things you should know first. It should be obvious that some tuning methods don't work on every car, so there will be 3 indicators on the top of the screen, and those are car class, race type, and drivetrain. So you know which tips work on which cars. Small tips will be written on the screen for a few seconds if needed. You will also be hearing a few terms throughout this video, which I will try to explain as simply as possible when we get to it. The 2 terms you will be hearing the most are oversteer and understeer. Oversteer looks like this. You will end up sliding the rear and eventually spinning out. Oversteer is not always a bad thing. Each car has a limit of grip and will oversteer at some point. Understeer is technically when your front tyres lose grip, but that doesn't often happen in Forza Horizon 5. In this game, you often find yourself not being able to fully utilise the front grip and end up being far from the limit of your traction. For the purpose of this tuning guide, this is what I will be referring to as understeer. Oversteer and understeer are the opposite of each other. You will be trying to aim at the middle of these two, which is where you will find the most grip. Most tunes in Horizon 5 aim more towards oversteer as it is more manageable than understeer, but you should still pay attention to have enough rear grip. It is also worth noting that Forza Horizon 5 is not a simulation. There are many things that work really well in the game, but make no sense at all in real life. With that said, let's get into the upgrades. The most important stat in the upgrade menu is PI, which is short for Performance Index. Your car's PI value determines your class. The higher this number, the faster your car generally is. Some upgrades are more efficient than others and give you more performance relative to the PI value they add. If I'm mentioning a cost for an upgrade, it is always related to the PI. Most of the other stats in the upgrade menu are inaccurate and basically mean nothing, even the simulated values. The only stats you should be looking for are weight and power. I will cover all the upgrades, but some cars might have limited upgrade choices. Let's begin. We start at the conversion tab in the upgrade menu, and the first option will usually be engine swap. Most cars have different sets of engines available, and some engines can be seen more than others. Unfortunately, some of these engines are more PI efficient than others, meaning they give more horsepower for the same PI cost. Here is a list of the most common PI efficient engines and the cars you can usually find them on. There are cars that have efficient engines when stock, but they are rare. Horsepower and weight are the most important things when looking for engines, but you should sometimes consider power band as well. More on that in the gear tuning section. But don't ever look at the in-game dyno graph. It's rarely accurate. Always check with telemetry. Next up on the upgrades is Drivetrain Swaps. Drivetrain tells you which wheels are being powered and driven by the engine. Front-wheel drive cars have the option to swap to rear or all-wheel drive, but it's not worth it since front-wheel drive is an efficient drivetrain for road racing. Rear-wheel drive cars have the option to swap to all-wheel drive, which is easier but not always faster. Generally, the higher the class is, the more efficient all-wheel drive becomes. In most S2 and some S1 cars, all-wheel drive can even drop your PI rating, which makes it a great choice. But if swapping to all-wheel drive adds a lot of PI, then it's mostly not worth it, especially in lower class cars. All-wheel drive cars also have the option to swap to rear-wheel drive, but it's not worth it. All-wheel drive is the best drivetrain for dirt and cross-country racing, but other drivetrain can be viable in B-class and below. Next up, we have aspirations. If you see centrifugal supercharger, use it. It's the most efficient engine upgrade, and one of the most efficient upgrades overall. Other aspirations are just as efficient as most of the other engine upgrades. They are generally used when you can't reach your desired power without them, as they add weight. For engines that use twin-turbo follow stock, it is better to switch to another aspiration if possible. Next up, you might have the option to swap in a body kit. Body kits improve your handling and allow for wider tyres, but they can also add drag. Drag is how much air resistance your car encounters when going at high speeds. Basically, more drag equals less top speed. Most wide body kits are extremely PI efficient, and it is best to install them. Now we move on to the Aero tab. Here you can find upgrades that add downforce to your car. Downforce is what keeps your car planted to the ground by using air to push your car to the ground. The faster you go, the more downforce and grip your car will have. Keep in mind that more downforce will also add more drag, which lowers your top speed. Anyways, back to the upgrades. For most cars, you will have the option to add Forza front splitter or rear wing. These upgrades add downforce to the front or rear end of your car. In terms of PI, rear wing drops your PI in front and all-wheel drive cars. Front splitter adds lots of PI, but it will be less costly at lower classes, sometimes even dropping your PI in C and D class. Using these aero parts, there are 3 viable combinations you can go for. No aero, rear aero only, or full aero. Full aero is a must for S2 class and above, but you don't really have to worry about it since most of the cars in this class come with adjustable front and rear aero by default. For S1 class, full aero is extremely common on both road and dirt, but there are cars that provide more than enough downforce by default, in which case you can get away by using no aero. Some cross-country cars in S1 class come with lots of dirt grip and drag by default, so it's best not to install any aero on those cars as well. In A class, full aero builds are still common for road, but rear aero only builds are frequent as well. This is because unlike front aero, installing rear aero actually drops PI in front and all-wheel drive cars. So if you have more than enough handling, installing rear aero is a great way to lower your PI. For dirt racing, full aero and no aero are the most common, but rear aero builds can be just as viable. So you have to try out for yourself and find out. For cross-country, however, no aero is the most common since there are less roads and more straights on the tracks. For B class and below, no aero builds start to replace rear aero builds for road. This is because front aero has a much lower cost in these classes. So if you went with rear aero, you might as well go with front aero, but that would add lots of drag, and if your car doesn't have a lot of power, no aero is going to be the better build for tracks with longer straights. For dirt racing, rear aero builds are slightly more common. This is because front grip becomes less important in B class and below dirt racing. For cross-country, rear aero builds are the most common on circuits, and no aero builds are the most common on sprints. D and C class is similar to B class road racing, mostly because front aero will also start to drop your PI. And that is everything you need to know about aero. There are also other parts you can add in the same categories, but most of them will only add or lower weight or drag. Some parts can add handling, but they are extremely rare. Now we move on to the tyres tab. The first and most important upgrade is tyre compound, which like aero is a large topic. First of all, there are some unique tyre compounds that you cannot upgrade to in every car. The most notable one is the stock tyres on extreme track toys. These tyres are grippier than slicks and for some reason have the same cost. Some modern sports cars and retro supercars have efficient stock compounds as well. Stock tyres aside, I'd like to take 2 more tyre compounds out of this equation. The first one is snow tyres. This compound is only efficient on one Hot Wheels track and is mainly used for drifting. Off-road compound is better than snow in every other aspect and costs just as much. The next one is sport tyres. This compound costs just as much as rally tyres and is worse in every way. Anyways, with those compounds out the way, we can rank other tyre compounds by 4 categories, and those are forward grip, angular grip, dirt grip, and high speed penalty. There is also rain penalty, but there is barely any rain in Mexico. We start off with forward grip, which is how much tyres your grip provide in a straight line. Obviously, drag tyres provide the most forward grip, as it is the only thing that matters in drag racing. Semi-slicks is the next best compound in terms of straight line grip, but it is nowhere near drag tyres. Semi-slicks is closely followed by slicks and rally tyres, which perform similarly. We then have vintage race, off-road, street, and finally drift, and white wall at the bottom. Angular grip is how much your tyres provide when turning. More angular grip makes your car turn better and improves cornering and response. Up at the first place we have slick tyres, which perform much better than any other compound. Drift tyres actually perform slightly better than semis and rally. We then have vintage race and off-road that perform similarly, followed by the streets, and at the bottom we have drag and white wall tyres. The next category is high speed penalty. On some tyres, the faster you go, the less grip you have. Off-road tyres are affected by this the most. There is no real way to test it, but drag, rally and vintage tyres also seem to have a small penalty, although it's not much, and you can safely use them at higher classes. Other tyres have little to no penalty. Now we move on to the next category, which is dirt grip. All tyres have more angular grip on dirt than they do on road, but their forward grip is highly reduced, especially on slick and drag tyres. Rally tyres are affected the least, but they are still nothing compared to off-road tyres, which are not affected at all. There is also rain penalty, which is not important in Horizon 5, but if you want to know, semi, rally and street tyres perform best on rain, with slick, drift and drag tyres performing the worst. And that is it. Those are the details about each tyre compound. Now here are the most commonly used tyre compounds for each class and race type. For dirt and cross-country racing, off-road tyres are always the best choice. There is literally no reason to use rally tyres when they cost more and have less grip on dirt. There is also a budget version of off-road tyres that comes stock on old trucks and SUVs. Those are also good for lower classes. For road racing, slicks are pretty much the only choice for S2 class. Rally tyres are the most popular choice for S1 class, but slicks are also pretty common for cars that have lower levels of grip. Semis are slightly less efficient on two-wheel drive cars, but they are not too bad and are used on some all-wheel drive cars. Drag tyres are also a viable choice in high downforce cars, and drift tyres can be seen in some power builds. For A-class, rally tyres continue to dominate and other compounds are rarely used. Slick and drag tyres are still a viable choice for front-wheel drive cars. Vintage race and drift tyres are also seen in power builds. For B-class, stock, street, vintage and drag tyres are common to see in balance builds, with white walls being used for power builds. Some front-wheel drive grip builds use rally or slick tyres, but for most tracks, drag tyres are a better choice. For D and C class, stock tyres are the most common choice. And that is everything you need to know about the tyre compounds. Now we move on to the next upgrade. Upgrading tyre width is the least efficient handling upgrade. Only use it for track-specific handling builds, or if you have no other options available. It is mainly used in S1 off-roaders with over 1-to-1 power to weight ratio. They are slightly more efficient on rear-wheel drive cars, but try to avoid it in general. Rear tyre width, on the other hand, is extremely efficient. For some reason, it lowers your PI on front and all-wheel drive cars. They add PI on rear-wheel drive cars, but they are still worth it. Now we move on to the rims, which add or remove weight depending on the car. Heavier rims are slightly more efficient on engines with lower torque. Speaking of torque, it's basically useless in small amounts, so don't bother going for it. More torque makes it easier to slide on dirt, but you won't really notice it until like 100 Newton meters of difference. Next up we have rim size. Larger front rims usually add PI, but they can also lower it on off-roaders. Larger rear rims, however, almost always lower your PI, which is a great choice if you want to get the most out of your PI budget. In general, larger rims make your car more responsive. You will mostly notice it at lower classes, where cars can become extremely sketchy and oversteery with large rims. Next up we have track width. Sepi tested these, and they had no notable effect on lap time. But in theory, upgraded front track width should give you better turn-in, but also has a small PI cost. Upgraded rear track width is usually free, and should give you more straight line stability. As for tyre profile, just max out the rear to drop PI and gain more grip. Similar to tyre width, it doesn't make sense. That was everything in the tyres tab. Now we move on to the drivetrain. First up, we have clutch. This upgrade is useless if you play on manual with clutch, but it will reduce your shift times on manual and automatic. Next up, we have transmission. If you have swapped your drivetrain, you will have a 6-speed race transmission by default. You can add more gears if you want, which we will discuss in gear tuning. If you are on your car's default drivetrain, you might also have the option to use street or sport transmission. These two transmissions can lower your PI. You should go with the transmission that has the lowest PI cost and provides adequate top speed. Sport transmission is often the best option, but street and stock transmission are still commonly used. Your gears might be all over the place with a stock transmission, but it is absolutely worth it if the PI cost is low and you don't play on automatic. Next up, we have driveline, which can slightly lower your weight. And finally, we have differential, which is free, so always upgrade it. It doesn't matter which one you choose, as long as all the settings are adjustable. That was it for drivetrain. Now we move on to platform and handling. Brakes are not an efficient upgrade and are rarely used, even for full grip builds. If you have problem crashing into walls, you should simply brake earlier and turn on the braking line. There are way too many cars, builds and tracks in this game, and it's not possible for a human to remember the braking points for all of them. Almost every competitive player uses either braking or full driving line. With that said, brakes are mostly seen on old race cars that are upgraded to S2 class. Next up, we have suspension. Stock suspension on some cars can be good enough. Sometimes it can even be better than upgraded suspensions. But if not, upgrade to race or rally suspension. Street suspension is rarely used, and sport suspension is useless, and it's how you can spot a lazy tune. Race suspension is often the best choice for road racing, but on some cars, rally suspension can give you more oversteer and weight transfer while costing less PI. It is usually used on higher class cars and front wheel drive cars. Rally suspension is the best choice for dirt and cross country racing, and it is rare to see an off-road car on race suspension. The main difference between these two is that rally suspension is slightly lighter, softer, and it is less likely to bottom out when landing jumps. Bottoming out is when you fully compress your springs and run out of suspension travel, which slows you down and makes your car unstable. And that's it for the suspension. As for anti-roll bars, they have a low PI cost and give you lots of tunability, so always upgrade it. Next up, we have roll cage, which basically stiffens up your suspension and anti-roll bars as a whole. This upgrade is basically useless for road, as it adds weight and rarely lowers PI. For off-road racing, however, it might improve your dirt grip and make your car more stable. It affects each car differently, but it is really efficient when upgraded by one level on old off-roaders and classic race and rally cars at A class. And finally, we have weight reduction, which is mostly efficient. Less weight gives you better handling, but you can usually have a better power to weight ratio for the same PI if you have more weight. Weight reduction is a must for A class and above road and dirt racing, since cars in these classes have lots of power and acceleration already. For cross-country, however, heavier cars have an advantage on sprints. They also get slowed down less when hitting props. At B class, weight reduction is still common, but some cars are light enough already, and it's best not to go for full weight reduction on them. Mostly all-wheel drive dirt cars. Not having full weight reduction is common in B class cross-country, unless you are using stock off-road tyres. In C and D class, having no weight reduction is a common choice, as most of the cars desperately need more power. And that was everything in platform and handling. Now we move on to the final category, which is engine upgrades. Upgrading centrifugal supercharger is the most efficient engine upgrade if you can afford it. Other engine upgrades are mostly similar. Camshaft is usually the least efficient engine upgrade, unless you play on automatic. There are a few engines where upgrading the camshaft is actually more efficient, but they are rare. Keep in mind that camshaft also changes your power band, so you might actually end up slower despite having more power on paper. Intercooler is slightly more efficient than other upgrades on some engines. Aside from those, you should mostly focus on engine upgrades that reduce weight, like the exhaust and intake manifold. You should still avoid reducing weight on low-class cars, for those cooling upgrades add weight and are more efficient. The last upgrade we have is flywheel, which is an inefficient weight reduction. And that was every upgrade. In the end, you should be a few PI points below or above your target class. Here are the upgrades you can use to increase or decrease your PI value by just a few points. The higher up on the list they are, the more efficient. It is usually better to finish slightly higher than the target PI, as the downgrades are slightly more efficient. Now we are done with the upgrades. Upon installing the part, you will be presented with 3 important stats. Power and weight, which we already know of, followed by lateral G. This stat is not accurate, but it can give you an estimate on how much grip your car has. Here are the average power to weight ratio stats for balance builds in each class. Non-competitive cars can fall below average, but that's fine and there's nothing you can do about it. The most common mistake that people make when building cars is opting for more grip instead of power. Most Horizon tracks favour power, so unless you intend to use your car on a handling track or Rally Adventure DLC track, always go for more power if you don't want to get destroyed in online races. Even if you somehow manage to make it up in the corners, you will most likely be roadblocked, which will make your car's biggest advantage useless. With more power, however, you can almost always take advantage of it on any straight. Less power gives you a false sense of grip and comfort, but if a car feels good to drive, it doesn't always mean it's faster. Grip builds are usually easier to drive, sure, but they aren't worth being seconds slower than even balance builds on most tracks. With that said, let's move on to tuning. I will be using metric units and conversions will be shown on the screen. You will need a basic understanding of tunable car parts for this section. Search up any real life or sim racing guide if you aren't sure. Just ignore their tips. They generally won't work for Forza. We start at the tyres. Less pressure will give you more grip, but too low and your tyres will gradually overheat and lose grip. More tyre pressure gives you more response, especially at higher speeds. Generally you want this to be as low as possible. On most tyres, 1.5 is the best overall value. Semi-slicks might need a tenth or two more. Slick and drift tyres are optimal at 1.8, and drag tyres should be set to minimum. For dirt and cross country, set tyre pressure to minimum, as it gives you the most dirt grip. Technically you should change your tyre pressure depending on the track and your car's weight, but it doesn't really matter. Tyre pressure makes a really small difference as long as you don't go too extreme. Don't bother with it too much unless you are going for a top time on a specific track. Next up we have gearing. You mostly have to tune based on this graph, which looks scary, but it's really simple. Here's how short gears look and sound like. And here's how long gears look and sound like. If you only have the final drive available, then your only concern is the top speed. Make sure your final drive is as short as possible without sacrificing too much top speed. If you are making an online build, here are the Horizon tracks in each race type where you can reach the most top speed. If you have a race transmission, then you can adjust each gear individually. For the first gear, adjust it so your car doesn't stall off the line. If it does, make the first gear short. For all-wheel drive cars, make sure your car doesn't bounce off the rev limiter too often when launching. If it does, make the first gear longer. Bouncing off the rev limiter in some high-class cars and most two-wheel drive cars is inevitable, so just make sure that you are at a good rev range at really low-speed corners. You can change auto-clutch behaviour by changing controller layouts. Along with launch control, this means your launch won't be the same as everyone else's. For your other gears, we first need to understand the engine's power band. To start off, your engine only makes the most horsepower at a certain RPM, which is usually at right where the red line starts. But you should double check with the telemetry. The further away you move from this point, the less horsepower you make. To find the optimal rev range, start at your peak horsepower and draw a circle from both sides until you hit the max RPM. This is your optimal rev range for most engines. Engines like LS V8 and Viper V10 have a wide power band, which makes them the main choice for cars with long unadjustable transmissions. Anyways, make sure your second gear starts inside or close to your optimal rev range when you come out of first gear. If it starts way before it, shorten your gear. Your third gear should be similar to your second gear, only slightly shorter. The graph is a good indicator of this. Once you have figured out your second gear, you can adjust the remaining gears based on the graph. Here is what the optimal gears should look like. If you run out of gears before reaching your optimal top speed, then you will have to lengthen each gear and sacrifice a bit of acceleration. If you have more than enough gears, you can simply decide not to use the remaining final gears. Now for the gear length. Theoretically, you will stay near your peak horsepower longer on a short gearbox, but you also have to shift more often. With each shift, you momentarily lose acceleration. In Forza, short and long gears don't really have a difference, as long as you don't go too extreme. For example, you don't need to use all of your 10 gears on an engine with a wide power band. Otherwise, it is mostly personal preference. Most people prefer between 6 to 8 gears. With shorter gears, you have to upshift and downshift more often, which is more difficult, but you are also more likely to end up at a higher RPM in turns, which slightly improves your cornering on some engines. If you are making a track-specific build, you can use this to your advantage. Shorter gears are more beneficial on dirt, as being in the right RPM makes you pull harder out of corners when sliding. Adjust them so you are redlining your car in the corners without bouncing off the rev limiter or stalling. Now we move on to alignment. Camber is how much your wheels are angled vertically. Negative camber looks like this, and positive camber looks like this. Your tyres deform when taking corners, and by having negative camber, you can make sure that they make as much contact with the road as possible, giving you more grip. Technically, you should open up the telemetry and adjust your camber until you have close to 0 camber on your outside tyres when taking corners. That would help a bit on track-specific builds, but for an overall build, there are simply too many different types of corners. Don't bother with it too much, and only use it as a tool to tune out understeer or oversteer. For all-wheel drive, start at minus 0.5 degrees on both front and rear. For rear-wheel drive, decrease the front to -1. For front wheel drive, start with -0.3 on front and -0.2 in the rear. For dirt and cross-country builds, start with 0.5 on the rear. For higher class cars, use lower values since more camber affects your high-speed grip. On most S2 and some S1 cars, you are simply better off using no camber at all. On road, you can add more negative camber to add more understeer or oversteer. More negative front means more understeer, more negative rear means more oversteer. Positive camber is rarely seen on road, but it is common for off-road builds. More positive camber on the rear makes it easier to get your car to slide on the dirt. Increase it if you are struggling to kick the back end out on dirt. Toe determines if your wheels are angled inwards or outwards. Positive toe looks like this, and negative toe looks like this. Positive toe on both front and rear can give you more turn-in and make your car more responsive, but it can also get it unstable and twitchy. Use it only if you can't get more oversteer in any other way. And negative toe is useless in Forza. Our final tuning option in this tab is caster angle, which doesn't really make a big difference. More caster gives you more straight line stability and more camber when turning. Just leave it at 7 and don't even think about it. Next up, we have anti-roll bars, or ARB, which controls how much your left and right suspension can differentiate from each other. A really soft ARB setup looks like this, and a really stiff one looks like this. For road racing, start with minimum front front and maximum rear. This gives you the most response and oversteer. If your car is too oversteery, add some front ARB. If your car is still oversteery, or you want less response, lower rear ARB. 1 on the front and 65 on the rear is the most common value for front and all-wheel drive cars, with maybe a little stiffness added to the front. For rear-wheel drive, it is mostly the same, but stiffer front and softer rear are more common. Generally, stiffening the front is better than softening the rear, but there are cars that benefit from more body roll, most notably some power builds. For dirt and cross-country, ARBs affect how much response you want out of the car when sliding, and plays a smaller role in overall understeer and oversteer. For a smooth driving experience, you could try 10 and 30, but if you want maximum response, go with 65 on both front and rear. With stiffer settings, your car will react quicker to steering adjustments, which allows for faster corrections, but it also makes it easier to overcorrect and either spin out or lose your slide. 1 and 65 is still a common setting for off-road cars that simply refuse to slide, but they usually have a stiffer front to avoid lifting the rear inside wheels, which is common in some cross-country cars. Add more front ARB if that happens. Now we move on to the springs, which controls how much weight is transferred under acceleration and braking. Really soft springs look like this, and really stiff ones look like this. Forza favours a relatively soft suspension setting. For road, start with 75 on both front and rear, and go a bit stiffer or softer on heavier and lighter cars. More stiff settings give you more response, but they also make the car more unstable over bumps, so try to avoid it if you can. Stiff settings are generally used in front-wheel drive cars and unresponsive cars. You could also use these settings to add understeer or oversteer, but after some point, they will start to have less of an effect, and you will end up making your car unnecessarily unstable. Generally, settings over 100 and below 50 are rare for race suspension. For rally suspension, however, it is slightly different. This suspension is soft by default, so you can get away by using even the maximum stiffness settings. I will keep spring settings for off-road racing until we reach damping. Ride height is just how much distance sits between your car and the ground. Max ride height is mostly better in Forza. It gives you more weight transfer and more oversteer, and it is less likely to set your car off by bottoming out. For every type of race, start with a maxed out ride height. For road, try to keep it even on both front and rear. However, lowering rear ride height is a great way to add more grip and more turning. It adds mid-corner understeer, but it's totally worth it. For front-wheel drive and lower class power builds, just go full squat. It doesn't make sense, but it just makes them faster for some reason. Lowering rear ride height is also a great option if your inside wheels are almost lifting off the ground and you don't want to increase your ARBs. Lowering both front and rear ride height is rare, but it is mostly used on no aero cars that lack high speed grip for their class. Now on to damping, which doesn't really make a big difference on road. Set bump stiffness to 3 and rebound between 2 and 4 times the bump. Anything more or less, and you make the car more unstable over bumps and elevation changes, but you might get more response as a result. If you are really desperate, you can even try more bump and rebound stiffness. You can also use these settings to tune in under or oversteer. It somewhat acts like a secondary settings for your suspension, but it won't make too big of a difference. For dirt and off-road racing, however, damping plays a much bigger role. Bump stiffness controls the rate of your suspension compression when going over bumps. Softer settings will compress quicker, which is what you want as it makes your car more stable over bumps, but too soft and your suspension bottoms out frequently. Bottoming out on jumps will also result in a reduction in speed, which is crucial for cross-country. Increase bump if that happens. Rebound controls the rate of which your suspension decompresses after being compressed. Softer settings rebound quicker, but too soft and your car bounces up upon hitting the road. So if your car is too bouncy over bumps, just increase the rebound. If your car feels too stiff, it might be because either your suspension is constantly bottoming out as a result of high rebound or your bump stiffness is too high. Looking at suspension telemetry can give you a good idea. Keep in mind that each car has a different suspension. Some cars will behave strangely no matter how you tune them. As for the settings, rebound stiffness is usually 2.5 to 5 times the bump stiffness. Start with 3 bump and 12 rebound, which works fine for most cars. On proper rally cars with good suspension, you can take advantage of soft settings like 1 or 2 bump and over 10 rebound. But on some older cars, you might need something like 6 bump and 15 rebound if you don't have much suspension travel. It is rare to have different front and rear settings unless your car bounces up from one side too frequently. For your settings, start by keeping them as soft as possible and make sure the front and rear have the same value. Stiffening up the springs is like adding more bump and rebound all together. It can make your car more responsive on dirt, but for some reason it also makes them more likely to bottom out, so try to keep them as soft as possible. Stiffening suspension on road is mostly used on cars that are too floaty or jelly. Now we move on to aero. More aero provides more downforce to the front or the rear of your car, but it also adds more drag. For road racing, front aero is basically free grip, so max it out. The added drag is only a concern in really slow car classes, where you have to adjust it depending on the track and car's default values. Rear aero depends on the drivetrain. Front wheel drive cars don't really need much rear aero, and you can almost get away with the minimum. For all-wheel drive cars at A class and below, rear aero won't really add handling and is often kept at minimum to minimize drag and add more oversteer. For S1 and above, rear aero should be slightly lower than front aero. Keep in mind that some cars have some level of front or rear downforce by default, so you might have to go lower or higher. If your rear aero is too high, your car will understeer at higher speeds. If your rear aero is too low, the rear of your car will feel loose at higher speeds. Adjust rear aero until you are in between these two. For rear wheel drive cars, rear aero is often more than front aero, especially for power builds where you should max out the rear aero. If your car has rear aero only, you should use minimum, except for cars that have unadjustable front downforce by default. And that is it for road racing. Just note that lighter cars generally need more rear aero. At S1 and above, rear aero is much more important, obviously with front still maxed out. You will have to use as much rear aero as you do on the front. Rear aero is often maxed out at S2 class. Only lower it if your car really struggles to slide. Same thing goes for A class, although having less rear aero is more common since rear grip is less important and drag becomes more noticeable. For B class and below, aero is basically useless. Rear aero is only added to decrease PI. Use minimum rear and minimum front if you have it. Same thing goes for cross country. Now we move on to brakes. First of all, you should know that this slider is inversed, making it confusing. Moving slider towards the rear will actually increase braking on the front. With that said, moving the slider towards the front can get you more turn-in while braking, especially on dirt. Moving the slider towards the rear can help with stability under braking on some higher class cars. As for braking force, using less pressure can help reduce lockups when using ABS. If your ABS is turned off, more pressure can lower your braking distance, but it will also make trail braking harder. Keep it between 100 and 140. Anything above that and you have a high chance of locking up. Now we move on to differential, or diff. In a corner, your outside wheels rotate faster than your inside wheels, which is exactly what a diff allows you to do. Having diff at 100% is like having no diff at all. and your left and right wheels will rotate at the same speed all the time. Having diff at 0% does the opposite, and your wheels can move at independent speeds from each other. You can set different lock settings for both acceleration and deceleration. Diff accel applies the lock when you are on the throttle, and diff decel applies the lock when you are off the throttle. For all-wheel drive cars, this is what you normally would see. You have accel and decel settings for both front and rear, along with a center diff. Start with 100, 0, 100, 10, 75 for road. Having more diff accel makes your car pull harder around the corner in Forza, so having more diff on both front and rear will make your car oversteer, especially at low speed corners. Too much front accel will only result in understeer in cars with tiny front tyres relative to the rear, such as the Bone Shaker. If your car is pulling too hard and losing traction, lower front accel. If that still happens, lower rear decel along with center diff. Having less diff decel will give you more lift off oversteer. If your car slides too much when you let off the throttle, add more rear decel. If that still happens, slightly add more front decel. Having more decel will make it less likely to lock up your wheels when braking, but it will also make your car more understeery off throttle. Having center diff towards the rear will send more power to the rear wheels, making the car behave more like a rear-wheel drive car, which makes it more oversteery, especially at higher speeds. If the rear is too loose and the car feels pointy, then you will have to decrease diff center. This will make the car more stable and often improves your low-speed grip. It is rare for the diff center value to go below 65 or above 85 for road. On dirt and cross-country, however, you need all your tyres to pull you out low-speed corners equally as much. Start with 65 and only increase it if you get lots of understeer on corner exits. The most common diff values for road racing are between 55 and 75. Diff locks on dirt are pretty much the same as road, although you generally need more diff decel as some cars are more prone to oversteer off the throttle. For rear-wheel drive cars, there is only one option for diff accel and decel on the rear wheels. Generally, the more grip and less power you have, the more accel value you need. S2 cars and grip builds in lower classes usually use max. Balance builds and high-class power builds are often between 50 and 80. Other power builds and lower class balance builds are between 25 and 50. Decel is usually at 0 if you have enough aero, and if not, slightly increase it to avoid locking up the rear wheels. Front-wheel drive cars are similar to rear-wheel drive, but this time you have diff options for the front wheels. Grip builds are often near 100. Drag tyre builds are around 50, balance builds slightly less, and power builds at around 20. And that's pretty much everything there is to FH5 tuning. Just using these starter settings alone will give you better tunes than any tuning calculators, and it takes much less time. You should still run your cars around a track and fine-tune it further if you have the time. Be sure to check out Sepi's FH5 tuning cheat sheet. I will link it in the description. If you found this video helpful, don't give me any credit, give it all to Sepi. All I did was turned his script into a video. I'll put a link to his channel in the description. Of course, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video.